Good morning, good morning, good morning. Today I'd like to talk about the age of information and the death of what I call formation. Formation of ideas, identity, civilizations. And the kind of backdrop of this is I was watching one of my favorite movies the other day, The Bourne Identity. And we're watching Bourne rediscover who he is and then kind of find out who he is from the CIA's perspective in the Black Book projects. But why I love that movie the most is he's kind of traipsing around Europe and running from police. One day he's in Germany, one day he's in Italy, one day he's in Prague. I love that about the movies, and one of the most fun parts about it is, to me, a lot of these areas in Europe and in that time, nostalgically, were very isolated. Fast forward to today, and I was just noticing how different the world is, and how we kind of live today in the most informed society that's ever existed, in my opinion. Every answer is kind of existing before the question is even asked. In our world, information is no longer scarce. It's actually so abundant that we don't really know what to do with it all. So, why does everyone feel more uncertain if we're in an age of the most abundance of information of all time? I mean, maybe the problem really isn't information. Maybe it's what information actually replaced. Maybe it's where effort and information and people's behavior goes. So for today, we're going to be talking about all of that, a little bit about how effort used to produce information, and now kind of information arrives a little bit before the effort is even put in. And this is kind of changing the fabric of who we are and how we become who we are. And so, to begin, I'd like to talk a little bit about how effort used to produce information. For me lately, I have been focused a lot in my readings on the age of discovery, a real fun time for me where the world wasn't really known. It was to be discovered. And I still think there's tons to be discovered today. I think on our earth, we really do sit on this perch and this pedestal and thinking, oh, we've discovered everything we need to discover. I don't think that's true. But if you go back in history, go back 300-400 years, the world does seem a lot bigger. We've got kind of entire libraries of information and wealth. Encyclopedias were a big part of this. Map making, traveling not just to travel, but to see what was there and report back to the people that sent you there. Universities and specialists and apprenticeships were also a big part of how we got our information. Taken together, information was earned. It was something that really needed to be studied and paid attention to and played with for a long time. You earned it. You maybe came with it curiously. You wanted to find something out. If you wanted to become a PhD level expert in something, it really took that time to do that. And it still does today. But that pursuit shaped the person, I think. And if you're working in isolation or working in a society that's not so interconnected, you can really truly become a specialist. If you're somebody who climbs mountains, climbing Everest would be something that would be a lifetime achievement, but you might not necessarily be able to share it with the world the same way you would be today, right? If you look at ancient civilizations, the same thing. People who were trying to discover them kind of before the Wikipedia era were really truly doing something fantastic, right? This scarcity created a bit of commitment. This effort filtered the desire a little bit. So the process kind of selected the people who stayed. Because it was hard, not everyone would do it, and thus the things that were achieved seemed a lot more difficult, right? All of life's wonders are now compressed into a social media app. The other day I woke up and I actually saw what it was like to climb Everest. Now, my opinion, I'm of the opinion that maybe that should be reserved for somebody who actually does climb it, but we're no longer in an era where we can decide whether or not information arrives right at our fingertips. So once information is kind of detached from effort, once I can pull up my social media and basically see and play around with the lifetime achievements of others, identity started to detach from experience. And you can really look at the loss of friction for this, right? In this era of comfort, resistance is kind of removed. And in the past, this resistance created reverence. People became highly respected for their ability to, traipse the entire mountainside and maybe deal with frostbite and horrible conditions and lack of oxygen and really, again, with that Everest metaphor, it really required reverence. And when someone does that kind of thing, even if they don't achieve their goal, they're still deeply respected for doing what they did. There was also a ton of mystery about it. Just thinking about how big the world seemed to somebody in 1900, for example, It's very different today, right? And so, for me lately, I've been spending a lot of time, like I said, reading about the age of discovery. And some of the things that stick out to me are like the accounts of folks going across the Sahara deserts, meeting the Bedouins of the northern African Sahara, meeting other polar explorers. I've been reading about them as well, just absolutely going through it to get to where they wanted to go, right? I think of Amundsen or of Shackleton, who really defines that era in terms of polar explorers. But each and every one of them was drawn to something extremely difficult. And I can't really say, if they had seen this on their social media apps, if it would still have called to them the same way. But this isolation, this reverence, this mystery was really something I look to and I go, gosh, that's really interesting. And we can see this with the mountaineers. We can see this with the early pilgrims and, how the landscapes were really and truly described. I've also been reading accounts of like some of the Spanish explorations and what they say when they first lay eyes on the Patagonia landscape, or what they first say when they land on the Americas for the first time. These maps once contained blank spaces, and those blank spaces created imagination and created wonder. And it led people to do stuff. It led people to explore. The journey mattered because the destination wasn't guaranteed. We inherit this world that was built by these people who embraced uncertainty. We inherited their discoveries without inheriting their struggle. Wonder kind of shrinks when there's nothing out of reach. And all of life's wonders compressed into a social media app, the cost kind of disappeared. The transformation also kind of disappeared with it. And so when we eliminated friction from knowledge, when we eliminated somebody having to suffer a bit to get to that real truth, we might have eliminated one of the things that gave knowledge its value. And when I think about this, if you look back a little bit, you didn't really need to be a personal brand in the past. And obviously that's something I've talked quite a bit about on this channel, but you really had a trajectory. There were identities emerging. It wasn't announced. Your reputation followed an action that was completed, and brands have recently replaced biographies. But biographies and stories and accomplishment and years of dedication to something used to really be what it is. Nowadays, just telling someone that you've done those things almost replaces that in terms of its societal place. I'm not saying I agree with that either, but it just seems to be the way things are. If you look at all these professions, right? Carpenters, chefs, even explorers, but more day-to-day stuff like professors, musicians, photographers, nobody would have in the past introduced themselves as a thought leader. If you think about someone like Anthony Bourdain or Steve Irwin, these people accumulated audiences before, or they accumulated their stories before they got their audience, really. Today it's kind of the opposite. Today it's like, well, what would the potential audience be if I did that thing? And if it's not going to be there when I arrive at that thing, then I'm not going to do it, right? Identity is kind of presented before all of that exists. And it's now based on like a resume versus a trajectory. And so, in the past where image was important in a way, it's now been replaced entirely by that facade, right? So in today's world, you do have an iteration before we integrate. We have endless inputs, no ability to digest what we're reading, and in the same way we used to anyway, and then constant novelty, right? In my life, I can read 3 books simultaneously. We'll be listening to podcasts while driving or doing stuff around the house. We're watching shorts while we're eating, although I got to get a handle on that. We're reading tweets or AI summaries, replacing books. We've got notes that are really replacing reflection, and having ChatGPT take my notes for me has been something I've really noticed in my life, is I don't always remember what it says. And the integration of this becomes digestion. Instead of actually sitting with stuff yourself and coming into your own conclusion, we're simply borrowing from the ethos, right? We used to be able to go for a walk and be bored and sleep and have a nice conversation and journal and have a little bit of silence. And how many ideas of these actually became behavior, right? How many books actually changed your angle lately? It's tough. And I wouldn't blame you if you said, well, yeah, geez, it really hasn't happened, because things are being compressed, but things are also more abundant than ever, like I said before. So if ideas don't really have time to sit with you and settle because you have so much information coming at you, it's tough to form a cohesive identity, and it's really difficult to see what sticks and what becomes part of you, right? And so that's one of the core theses that I'm going to get to today is, nothing has time to become part of us, right? Everything seems to be replaced immediately, and this novelty interrupts permanence. A favorite character of mine from a show is Barney Stinson from How I Met Your Mother. Now, I don't always agree with everything he does, but one of his most famous lines is "New is always better." And I love that premise. It's really funny. I don't know if I agree with it, but it seems that way in our society that new is actually always better. The newest, latest thing is always better than the thing that nobody's talking about anymore. Everything seems to be replaced immediately. Novelty, again, is interrupting everything. And so when you look at, some of the main social data points from the past, if you look at like artifacts of what it was like to be alive in a certain time, you have lots of aspects of that. You have albums, movies, vacations, friendships, mentors, one book to think about all summer, one CD for months, one hobby for years. Compare that to today. Exposure isn't transformation, and experience does need repetition. But we're really not sitting with that experience enough. Memory needs space, and reflection needs time. But if we're constantly moving around and constantly subscribing to new ideas and new identities, and then we're also being programmed, as I've talked about in other episodes, it can really be tough to form a centralized identity. And if your experiences don't stick with you, then your identity can't either. And that's another thing that I've really noticed lately is that a lot of folks have floating identities. And we talked about burnout in the last episode. We've talked about, mental malware and what it's like to really iterate on yourself and become the person you want to be. If you're constantly getting new information about yourself and you're constantly seeing things from a new light, it's going to be tough to form that centralized identity, right? And I think about this in a more plain and abstract way, but if you have somebody who grew up in, say, 1970 or 1980, they could quite literally live a life that doesn't have many people challenging it, right? How many times can you look back to your parents and say, gosh, if they had social media in their hands when they were young, would they have made all the same decisions that they made? Because what I think about for this is some folks are influenced by their friend groups, by their parents, by the people around them, and that can be a rather limited and biased information set, right? Vis-a-vis today, you're comparing yourself with the entire world. And there could be people in your exact situation who have already kind of maxed out the happiness scale or maxed out the highest potential earnings of that vertical. And that might make you feel like there's no ground left to break, right? If you're looking at somebody like, oh, look at that, I want to be a doctor. And then you go and see there's this guy on social media. He's not only a doctor, but he's a thought leader, and he's posting all the time about all the people he's helping. He's making all this money. It might make you feel like, oh gosh, that's a lot to compete with if I want to be just like that person. I don't know if there's really anywhere to go with that. I don't know if there's anything new I can bring to this, right? And so that's kind of what I'm getting at, is maybe in another era, nostalgically, folks don't have the same problem. Their identity forms and it sticks and it's rigid. They don't have enough information confronting that, and it forms, and people are the way they are. Today, we're slightly interested in everything. We're deeply rooted in almost nothing. Constantly reinventing ourselves. I mean, for me, that feels true. If I'm off base here, tell me. But a lot of people are constantly seeing new ways of living, and it might make you think quite a bit. When we wake up in the morning, I don't know if it's great to be seeing the accomplishments of the world, but it certainly makes me think. If you're having, an average sort of day, and you see somebody climbing Mount Everest, it might make you think, gosh, am I doing enough here? Am I forming the kind of person I want to be? I'm not climbing Everest, and thousands of people aren't cheering on what I'm doing. Gosh, what should I be doing, right? So then that leads to endless optimization, a fear of committing, a new niche possibly every week, every month's a new identity, and everything feeling unfinished. This is where burnout comes from, and I've talked about that endlessly, so I won't go into it there. But when you look at things like, lack of direction, feelings of being an imposter, why committing to something feels harder, why mastery feels rarer, this could all be explained by just the sheer wealth of information that our society has. So we achieved exactly what we wanted in this information age. There are literally no human bounds to what we can achieve, but the consequences have arrived somewhere else, right? The dream succeeded technically, and we did get to where we wanted, but things are a little bit inverted spiritually. And it's kind of like junk food. And I'm not going to be the first guy to in social media to junk food, but if you're looking at it and it's not making you feel good, and at first when you take that first bite, it gives you that dopamine hit and it makes you feel great. And then later on, you're like, oh wow, I've gotten fat. It's kind of what's going on spiritually here. We do have universal knowledge. That is amazing. We have global communication as well, which is insane. It's literally sci-fi. We have instant access to all sorts of information, all sorts of processing system, all sorts of even digital brains now. It's unlimited, and you could not ever consume. Even just pick a topic, you probably couldn't consume all the content to do with that topic, let alone everything out there online. I was just thinking the other day about the wealth of history podcasts that would be online today. I don't think I could ever cover them if I wanted to, right? So this is a technical success. If you have a niche, if you like something, if you're interested in anything, this is an abundant time. And I want to stress that. I'm not here to doom and gloom. It's amazing. And I could spend the rest of my day learning about the voyages of Magellan, and then I could go over to a different part of history, and then I could talk about politics, and I could go and learn how to play the piano later on with my day, and then I could be watching the World Cup, and I'm here, there, and everywhere, right? But there is a human cost to this, and I think that's what I'm circling today. Knowledge without effort is a little bit tough to understand. It'd be like, if you skipped ahead in your life to a certain point, and you didn't know how you got there, but everyone's asking you, oh, what are you going to do next? And you're like, I don't even know how I got here. That's kind of how we got a lot of the knowledge today. I mean, I can turn on my phone and I could probably cosplay as a quantum scientist for 10 minutes if I did a bit of reading, right? And that's kind of knowledge without effort. I didn't have to go to school to get that. I just watched some YouTube video of someone explaining it to me simply, and now I think I'm an expert, right? We also have this identity forming without experience. This fake it before you make it society of social media. We have a lot of experts. We have a lot of people who just said the thing before they are the thing, and suddenly you're paying for their course and you're financing their life. Not to poo-poo anyone's style. I think that there is a lot of identity without experience, and I've suffered from these feelings as well. When you don't have a sense of community with the thing you're interacting with as well, you can kind of be detached from it. So if you are getting all the anecdotes and stories of a community, but you're not a part of it, you might be missing some core knowledge set or some real deep respect or reverence for the knowledge that you have. Knowledge is power, as they say, right? So if you don't have a deep respect for it because it came to you easy and you don't value it, then it might not be protected or respected or worth it in the end of the day, right? When you have formed an opinion without studying, in my opinion, social media gives you opinions. So if you don't study them and you're just on your phone taking the information at face value, then you really do have, a generalization problem, right? When you explore without leaving your house, that might diminish your own ability to do things, right? When I go and research again the Voyages of Magellan, which is the most recent book I finished, it might make me not want to do the same thing myself, right? I have less of a need to go to Patagonia and follow his same path. I also don't have the means and the will and the resources to do it, but let's just say I did. Maybe reading about that and experiencing it and then going on social media and seeing someone going there themselves would diminish my personal need to go there. And that would take away from my ability to actually interact and actually explore. And so we're kind of getting straight to the point here with a lot of the stuff. We're going right to the heart of the core matter of what things are. If I'm, again, to go back to that Everest example, if I'm actually looking at what it looks like to climb to the top of it. Now, I can't perceive every aspect of it, but it's definitely information without wisdom, and there's a connection happening there that isn't necessarily warranted, right? So we answered a lot with humanity. We have done a lot, and we have created a society of abundance, but it does take away a bit of the access that we have in terms of our personal access. Now, I can go and look and experience the various aspects of the world, but I might not know what it's like to achieve them myself, right? And so that's when when I'm talking about formation, that's what I mean. So we don't really become ourselves at the speed of information. We actually become ourselves at the speed of experience when you do things. And my worry and my concern with a lot of this is when you look nostalgically at the way the world has been built, other areas, other generations of people have had no problem forming their identities. Not to say that they like them. But with our generation, we just maybe don't know what to be because there is that wealth of information. My opinion is that experience requires repetition. To be truly great at anything, you need to live in it and experience it and do it for years. The 10,000 swings of the sword, as they say, right? So that's what I think about a lot of the information age problems that we're running into is when you look at this wealth of information, it's a lot. And like if you're drinking from a fire hose, like they like to say in corporate, you might not be able to quench your thirst at all. And when we're being blasted by these social media applications, the same thing is going on. Our brain does not have time to stop and go, oh, what is that? Where does that go? What happens with that information? How do I update my worldview? And if you look at like the last year in social media, even looking at like the news cycle, for example, it can be so tough to form an opinion on what the world actually is when in a week's time our focus has shifted to another massive story or massive problem or concern, right? We don't have time to sit with it. And if you, for example, if you saw the most amazing conclusion on an Instagram reel, would you even know it? Or would it just be mixed in with the vast wealth of other bits of information that you've got today? So how do we safeguard against this? What do we do? You know, is social media bad? Should you just stay off it? No, I don't think so. But when I was looking at that Bourne Identity movie, I thought, gosh, you know, nobody has a cell phone in their hands. None of these people in Europe know that there are other people in Europe doing other things the same way we do today, right? And so when he goes from country to country and town to town, he's actually, you know, experiencing different cultures. And another thing that's happened with this, you know, democratization of information is there's no mystery anymore. You can't go to a country the same way you could in that movie. And that's a part of the world I'm kind of ruining a bit. I'd like to go to a place that's completely isolated and not influenced by something that's happening in America, for example. And I think about that movie specifically because you can go and be a stranger somewhere. You can go and live a completely different life, and you could probably just assume a new identity, right? But in today's world, most people have access to the same set of information, and this is only increasing in terms of adoption. So what happens when a totally globalized world seeks to completely integrate itself, and we don't have pockets of Europe anymore, we don't have pockets of Asia anymore, we don't have pockets of Africa anymore, we have a diffused culture set across the world. This is a concern of mine simply because I love Europe. And when I think of Italy, you know, I want to go to a small Italian town that still feels like exactly the way it felt 30 years ago. And part of the reason I made this episode is because I was watching that movie and I thought, gosh, you know, things have really changed in terms of how the world looks, but it's also changed in terms of the mystery. And so, you know, information and in the information age is diametrically opposed to privacy and to mystery. And that's an essential tenet of surveillance capitalism. It's an essential tenet of our information age. And it is one of the biggest drawbacks of it. You can no longer go and escape in a place. And likely as well, if you do go somewhere, you're probably not as impressed by what you're seeing because you've seen it on social media. If I'm planning a trip to Italy, I can pretty much live there throughout the entirety of the time I'm planning that trip. I can picture myself there to the nth degree. There is no mystery when I get there. There's no random, oh, maybe there is, but there's less of it, right? And that's kind of what I'm getting at. When I watched that movie, I thought, you know, if I could be a secret agent going around Europe, there might be a good chance that I do actually disappear. In today's information age, I would be less likely to even do that. And, you know, obviously security has increased quite a bit. I quite like that. But the other side of it is we're really just, at the speed of information, our brains are not able to process everything that's coming in. And I think that's where a lot of our society is lacking. If you see people feeling like their achievements don't mean as much, or they don't know where they are in life, or they feel like they're just not getting what they used to get from life, this might be why. And what I would point to is a sort of inflation of the social milieu. It's an inflation of the social values, right? If we're getting so many pieces of information, then it's inflating the value of it, right? It's diluting its ability to impact us. So when I go to Europe and I no longer have the same sense of mystery that I might have in the past, that's a world that's no longer here. And so that's why I wanted to make this episode today. When we are going through information, when we are accessing the internet, we need to really just be mindful of the pace of information that we're getting, right? So in conclusion, when we look at this holistically, we want to become ourselves, but we do want to safeguard against that information wave. We also really got to remember that your experience requires repetition. If you keep changing things up because it's not working, or you keep looking under the rock to see if the plant is growing or if there's something growing underneath it, you probably aren't going to get there, right? And so another thing is commitment requires time. And if you are going to be truly good at anything, and you find that, I go on social media and I see all these people so much better than me, that's not a normal thing. That really isn't. And you should be looking at the highest level of competition when you want to make something or create something or measure yourself against the best. But social media has totally warped this to the point where it feels like you're climbing a mountain to enter someone else's space, right? So time has really become the one thing that modern life refuses to give us. All that information has not allowed us to have any more time. And the information isn't really making us shallow, but the constant interruption and the constant speed of it is, right? Probably what we're missing isn't another podcast, but it's like a little bit of silence, a little bit of mindfulness, a little bit of space to become part of us. Next time you read something, think about integrating it, write about it, sit with it. Don't just move on to the next reel, to the next piece of information. Actually cherish it, And that's, I think, where wisdom comes from. It's always been information that survived long enough to change the person carrying it. So that's essentially where I'd like to go today. I mean, when you look at a lot of the changes in our society, this is one of them. We have an abundance. This is a double-edged sword. It's a very good thing. It can also be a very harmful thing. And I think this is the smoking of our generation. Although information can be as deadly as smoking, it can also be as abundant and as amazing as we'd like it to be. So in that way, it's not the same as smoking. But I think when we look back, we'll say, wow, this generation was really just blasted with too much all at once, and our brains have not caught up. I don't think our brains have even caught up to the industrial age, to be honest with you. And even the modern world after World War II, kind of 1950s, nuclear family, into the information age, into this kind of information capitalism, we have not really fully developed our brains in response to this yet. So if there is a feeling that you have, oh, this world is really weird and I don't really know where my place is in it, that's probably a byproduct of all of this happening at once. And like I said, if anybody, 30 years ago was constantly, every single day, reminding themselves of what other people are achieving and doing and what amazing things are going on in this world, it might devalue everything they were doing too. And so that's something I'd like to get back to, is a generation of folks who are very grateful for what they have, but are not constantly comparing themselves to the random person on social media that just happened to pop up on the glass screen in front of them. This has been another episode of Thinking Out Loud with Jesse. I want to thank you again for sticking with me through this one. I also like to kind of pontificate here with you. So if you have any ideas about this, or if you think I could have gone a different way, or you'd like to hear me talk about something else in the future, let me know. I'm always open to feedback, and this kind of thing is really helpful to the channel as well. But thanks again, as always, for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode today. Take care.